Okay, welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Franck Lepetit, and he's going to talk about an incredibly long title, which I'm not going to read, but he's an expert in PDRs, and it's a fascinating bit of physics. He got his degree in Meudon, then went to Sweden, and now is back in Meudon. So he's a local, so if you want to talk to him, you have to go to Meudon. You know, it's a huge trek. You have to go down to Meudon. Anyway, so the floor is yours. Welcome.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about what we have learned with Herschel about photodissociation regions. So most of the results I'm going to present here can be found in papers on arXiv that have been submitted. So that may need to be about radiative feedback. So in fact, when we want to study the interstellar medium is a quite complex medium, because depending at which scale we look at it, we do not have at all the same processes to consider. In fact, in practice, all the processes play a role, but they are more or less important depending on the scale. So at large scales, the composition and the distribution of the ESM is controlled by gravitation, magnetic field, turbulence, and large-scale dynamics. If you go down to intermediate scales, then we start to see the molecular clouds. And here, the shape and the physics is controlled also a bit by dynamics with shock, winds, explosion of supernovae, and also the photons, who plays a critical role to shape these interstellar clouds and to control their composition. So that's where we start to see what we call the photodissociation regions. So that's what I'm going to talk about. That is the regions of the interstellar medium where the physics and the chemistry are controlled by the UV photons. So they are typically the edge of the molecular clouds where the radiation field from the massive stars controls the physics at the edge of these clouds. So when we study the photodissociation regions, we can have some insights on the radiative feedback, on the effect of the radiative feedbacks of stars on their parent clouds. And if we look at these PDRs, the edge of these molecular clouds, we can observe the chemical composition. So here, if we want to understand what is happening, what is the physics that takes place here in these regions, we have to consider the impact of photons, impact of cosmic rays, the chemical reactions, and sometimes also, because it is important, the dynamics. And observing the line emissions of atoms and molecules in this region, we can try to understand the radiative feedback of the massive stars on these regions. So today, these regions can be studied with many instruments, in particular in the submillimeter and millimeter domains. And for example, this is the Ose head, a zoom on the Ose head, so a famous PDR. And as you can see, we can now detect many molecules in such regions, and quite complex molecules as the methanol or the formaldehyde. And you see that there is a very patchy structure, quite complex, in fact, to understand if you want to understand the chemical processes underlying these observations. So I'm not going to talk a lot about complex molecules today. Just going to focus on PDRs. What are PDRs and what we have learned with Herschel? So PDRs are studied from several decades now. This is the first schema of PDRs that were done by Tillens and Uhlenbeck in the 80s. And the global structure, the global vision has not changed, in fact. So it is the cloud is illuminated by stars. The UV photons have enough energy to dissociate the molecules, in particular H2. And as soon as the photons are absorbed by the grains and by the molecules themselves, for example, in the lines of H2, we observe a transition between the atomic phase and the molecular phase. So determining precisely the location of the transition between H1 and H2 is very important, because if we want to study star formation rate, for example, we need to estimate the mass of the cloud that is molecular, because it is in the molecular part of the cloud that you can form stars. So in front of this H2 transition, we have an atomic layer with oxygen, C+, and neutral hydrogen. And when we go deeper in the cloud, once H2 is formed, then other molecules can be formed, with the C plus CCO transition. And then later we have more complex molecules. So in the 80s, people thought that O2 was a reservoir in the gas phase. In fact, we know now from Odin observations and from Herschel observations that it is not the case because of surface chemistry. So in PDRs, we observe quite complex molecules, but the observations of atoms on simple molecules are also very interesting because they are the main coolants often, and they can give access to the chemical and physical processes, the properties of the gas, as the density of the medium, the temperature of the medium, and also the energy transfer mechanism. So I'm going to come back on that. Since the 80s, so in the 80s, 90s, and before Herschel, we could observe some lines of simple species. It is quite easy to observe the oxygen, C plus carbon, for example. We also some rotational lines of H2, some vibrational lines of H2 on the ground transition of CO. And also, with balloon mission, it was possible to observe some excited CO as a 15-14 transition. And in fact, it appeared to be very difficult to explain all the emission of all these species with a uniform medium. So a typical view was that the PDRs were clumpy medium, where you would have an interclump medium with a low density, 10 to the 3 particles per cubic centimeter, that would be responsible for the emission of atomic lines on the less excited molecular lines, and to have inside this diffuse low-density medium clumps of matter with higher density, 10 to the 5, 10 to the 6 particles per cubic centimeter, that would explain the excited emission, because if the UV photons can penetrate between the clumps, they can hit the edge of the clumps, and there, because the density is high and the radiation field would be high, so the temperature would be high also, you could explain some excited levels as the CO 15-14 transition or the vibrationally excited H2. So this picture that comes from a few observations is still used today by some groups. So for example, it is the picture that has been used to explain the observation toward typical PDR. So we find the Orion bar, NGC 7023, M17, and so on and so forth. And this is a paper, for example, from last year, where they tried to simulate and to explain the observations in the Orion bar, where they need to do very complex structure. For example, here it is a 3D structure of the Orion bar. So the Orion bar is represented here. So you have the trapezium stars that illuminate the molecular cloud, and the bar is the edge of this molecular cloud. So in these complex simulations, in each cell, you have clumps that are represented here, plenty of clumps, and the UV photons can penetrate through the clumps deep into the cloud. So that is a common view we had before Herschel observations. To be completely honest, there are in fact a few alternative scenarios that have been proposed in two papers. First one by Marconi in 1998 and in 2005 by Allers and Bruce Drain, where they say maybe it is not necessary to have clumpy mediums, but maybe it would, instead of being a uniform medium, we would have a constant pressure medium. And that could also, for them, explain the observations. But these papers were not very well cited and nearly forgotten. So, what Herschel has changed, and that is, I think, for the interstellar medium, that is one of the main results of Herschel in our community, is that it allowed, for the first time, to observe what we call the CO ladder. So that is, these are the CO ladders here for different objects. So you have here the flux, the intensity of the CO lines as a function of the upper rotational state. So as you can see, in some objects, for example, Orion H2 peak 1 or Orion KL, we observe the emission of CO up to G equals 50 nearly. So it's very exciting because the energy of this quantum level is about 6,000 Kelvin. And for typical PDRs, we observe the CO excitation up to G equals 20. So that is the first time we got all that. Previously, we could just observe the low GCO lines, and sometimes the 15, 14 lines. When the CO is very excited, as here, it is related to massive star-forming regions, so we expect that the source of energy that can explain the excitation of CO in these objects are the outflows on the shocks, who brings dynamical energy that can heat the gas and excite the gas to very high temperature, and excite the molecules in their quantum levels. It is observed not only for objects of our galaxies, but these CO laders, we know of them for many objects in galactic regions and in extragalactic regions. So here we observe it. Is this an example from the Kamenetsky paper? There is also a paper by Rosenberg who showed plenty of CO laders for different objects. So we do not have in these CO laders levels higher than G equals 14 because it would require PAX observations on Herschel, and PAX did not observe, it has not been used for these objects. And globally, up to now, there were very few explanations, very few studies to try to understand how we can explain these CO laders, what are the physical processes behind that. And we can wonder if from the CO laders, from the excitation of CO we can observe in all these objects, we can deduce the energy sources. Where does come from the energy? So people suggest that it could be UV photons, but sometimes they say that UV photons is not enough to heat the gas to high temperature to excite the CO, so maybe it could be X-rays, or often they invoke mechanical energy as turbulence or shocks to excite the gas. The other questions we can also ask about that is that what are the energy transfer mechanisms? Because, for example, if it is UV photons, then we have external energy here, the energy by the radiation field, that is converted inside the cloud to internal energy through pumping, and then to kinetic energy, so the temperature, through collisions between the particles. And also, what can we learn from such observations about the morphology of PDRs? So, with Christine Joblin, Marie Vengerin, and different people, and Émeric Bron also worked a lot on that, we try to answer to this question studying two typical PDRs. We observed with Herschel the Orion bar and NGC 7023. And the question we wanted to answer was, can UV photons, so the emission of stars, the photons emitted by massive stars, can they explain the CO excitation or not? Or do we need other source of energy? So the Orion bar and NGC 7023 are two of the most typical PDRs in our galaxy. They are very close from us, so it's possible to observe them with a good resolution. And as you can see, in these two objects, so that has been observed by Spire, HiFi, and PAX, we observe the excitation of CO up to G equals 20, roughly. So to try to investigate if UV photons can be responsible for such CO excitation in PDRs, we used the Meudon PDR code. So the Meudon PDR code is a code we are developing at Paris Observatory. So it is a very old code now that is upgraded year after year. And what does the PDR code does? It is a code that computes the chemical structure and the gas temperature of a slab of gas illuminated by a radiation field. So the goal is to get such a structure. So you, for example, here you have the density of some species as a function of the visual extension. So the edge of the cloud is here. The UV photons illuminate the cloud on this side. And you see that you have the transition between the atomic hydrogen and the molecular hydrogen here. And then deeper in the cloud, the transition between the C+, the C, and the Cu. So once we have that, we can compute, and since we have also the gas temperature, we can compute line intensities and compare that to the observations. So such a code have lots of physics. I'm not going to explain all the physics there is in such codes, but you have to solve the radiative transfer from the far UV to the submillimeter domain. So considering the absorption in continuum and in lines, the non-local pumping. It solves also the chemistry. So we have typically several hundred of chemical species with thousands of chemical reactions. So that is linked to the radiative transfer to compute the photodissociation of molecules. The chemistry is done both in the gas and on the grains. And it helps also to solve the thermal balance, because interstellar medium is not, most of the time, not at thermal equilibrium. We have to compute for the main species the excitation is the quantum levels, considering all the mechanisms, so the radiative mechanisms, and the collision, the excitation and the de-excitation collisional processes. Okay. So, we did a comparison between the numerical models of PDRs with the observations towards these two objects, Orion Bar and NGC 7023. And we also used all the data that were available, so from Spitzer, from ISO, CFHT, and so on and so forth, to get the largest number possible of constraints to try to find if we can explain such observations or not. So we have the full 12 CO laders to interpret for 423 to about 2090. We have the H2 emissions from rotational levels on some vibrational lines, and also the 13 CO, CH+, SCO+, C+, O, HD, and so on and so forth. So the total of constraints is about 40 lines, so that is a very large number. Most of the time when we do such comparison, we have less constraints than here. These two objects are very well known, so we know the stars that illuminate the clouds. We know the distance, roughly, between the stars clusters and the cloud itself. So the radiation field is not a free parameter, and it can be fixed. So here the notation G0 is in fact a scaling factor to the mean intensity, the mean UV intensity in the interstellar medium. So when it is 10 to the 4, it's a very bright PDR. This is more moderate PDR. And what we found is that indeed it is very difficult to explain all the constraints together with a constant density model. So a constant density model seems to not be able to explain all these emissions. But to the contrary, if we investigate isobaric models, then we are able to explain most of the observations. So here it is the example for NGC 7023. So this is a simple model where we have only two free parameters to try to reproduce about 20 constraints. We do not use all the constraints that were available because we wanted to study the very excited CO. So the region of the cloud where the excited CO come from. And for example, line as the one of C+ or oxygen may come from other region in front of the molecular gas. And lines as CO in very low level, for example, the 1,0 or the 2,1 transitions can come from deeper in the cloud. So we just focus on the excited CO on the H2 transitions. And in fact, we find that we can quite easily, in fact, explain consistently all these lines. So for example, you have here the H2 lines. The observations are in red and the model is in black, so it's quite good. On the excited CO also. For the CH+, it works also relatively well. And you see that for most of the atomic lines, it is okay, except it for the C+, but the C+ is not, all the C+ emission is not related to the PDR itself. Some parts of the C+ emission can come from the atomic zone in front and ionized gas also. And for the oxygen 63 micrometer line, there are some absorption effects, so it is quite normal that we do not succeed to do it. What has been surprising, in fact, in these results, is that we can explain the excited CO by the impact of UV photons on the interstellar gas, but at the condition that the pressure is very high. So we find a pressure of 10 to the 8 Kelvin per cubic centimeter. So it is quite higher than the pressure in an H2 ionized gas region, for example. That would be 10 to the 7, roughly. So that would mean that at the edge of the PDRs, we would have a compressed layer in which the emission of CO and the emission of H2 would arise. And this high pressure zone is not stationary. It has to be maintained by dynamical effects. I will come back on that after. So that is one of the first interesting results. And in fact, we also had observations of the Carina region. So with prior observations, so we mapped all this region of the Carina region. So Carina 1E here is a typical PDR that is illuminated by the Trumper 14 cluster that contains about 12 O stars and 100 B stars. So it is a bit further than the Orion bar on NGC 7023. And for this one, we add the CO ladder in each of the pixels. And for each of the pixels, also, we can find a good agreement between models and observations. And for each pixel, we inversed the problem. So we are able to deduce the UV intensity at each pixel and also the pressure. And here again, we find that to explain the observations with PDR models, so with the impact of UV photons on the clouds, we have to assume that the pressure is quite high, 10 to the 8 also Kelvin per cubic centimeter. So here, that is what my postdoc did, that is Ronin Wu who did that. She also looked at the position of the stars in the field, estimated the distance of the stars to the various pixels, and she finds a good agreement between the radiation field that is deduced by the models, at least in the Carina 1E region, and the radiation field we deduce from the position of the stars on their category. So that confirms a little bit the radiation field that we find with the numerical models. And very interestingly, we find also that for each pixel, we find a relationship between the thermal pressure in this slab of gas and the intensity of the UV flux. Okay, as you can see here, it is nearly a linear relationship. And if we do the literature and we look at a bit what has been found for other objects, it seems that there is, so that is the two objects we studied in the WADI Herschel key program. It seems that there is a relationship between the thermal pressure at the edge of PDRs and the intensity of the UV radiation field, as you can see. So it seems that the UV radiation field from massive stars has an impact on the structure of PDRs and creates a high pressure zone in which CO can be very excited. So it changed completely the view we had about PDRs. Previously, we thought that the key point was to have clumpy medium with clumps at high densities embedded in diffuse gas. Now, it seems from such observations and ALMA observations that I will show you later, that in fact, we would have a compressed layer with a very high pressure, to 10 to the 8 Kelvin per cubic centimeter, in which the HH2 transition and the C plus CCO transition would take place, and that this would be compressed by the UV radiation field. So, first conclusion that the UV photons that in PDRs at least can explain the excitation of CO. So there is a relationship between the excitation of CO that is observed in PDRs and the UV radiation field. We do not need ad hoc hypotheses as X-rays, cosmic rays, or shocks to excite the gas. On the edge of the PDRs would be at very high pressure, and that would be maintained dynamically with a link to the massive stars. So the question now is why? Why does, since the 80s, numerical models were not able to find such results? Why did they need clumpy hypothesis? Or to introduce more ad hoc heating mechanisms? So there are three very important points to consider here. It is first the physics of H2, the state-to-state chemistry, on the dynamical effects, the link between the radiation field and the dynamics. So let's come back on I'm going to take the best model we found for NGC 7023, and if we look at a bit the structure that is predicted by the model. So here again, you have the densities of the species on the y-axis, the depth in the cloud from the left to the right with the UV photon that comes on this side. And what we see is that we have the HH2 transition that is roughly here. So you have the abundance of H2 that equals the abundance of H. And the C plus C, the CCO transition that is deeper here in the cloud. And what is interesting to note, in fact, is that in green, I represented the emissivity of the CO 1918 lines, so on the y-axis. And what we found is that CO emits, in fact, 50% of the emission of CO comes before the CCO transition. So that changes a bit the picture, that it is not simply a transition between atomic and molecular hydrogen and then deeper in the cloud formation of CO. In fact, the CO starts to form as soon as the H2 starts to form also. So we have a bit of CO before the CCO transition, and this CO is very excited and emits and responsible for the emission. So the first point to understand is the physics of H2. H2, in fact, can seem a very simple molecule. In fact, it's a very complex molecule to simulate. It has no dipolar transition. It's formed not in the gas phase, but as a surface of grains. So it's quite complex to simulate. It is a molecule that has no direct UV dissociation. To be dissociated, so here you have the electronic state of H2 on the ground electronic states in red with the raw vibrational levels. In fact, most of the H2 is in the ground electronic state. It absorbs a UV photons that excite the molecules in an electronic state, and then it dissociates when it de-excites towards the continuum. Or it can also de-excitate towards the linked raw vibrational level, then cascades and emits infrared photons. So to compute precisely the photodestruction of H2, you have to simulate in your code all these mechanisms, absorption, excitation mechanisms. Okay, so a full modeling of H2, in fact, requires to take all these processes and to simulate them very precisely in codes. In fact, in most of the codes, that is simplified because it's quite complex to do. But it is important to do that precisely because H2 controls the transition between the atomic and the molecular phase, and it also controls a little bit the heating of the gas. So most of the heating in PDRs at the edge of molecular clouds is due to photoelectric heating. But in fact, when the density is high and the UV radiation field is high also, H2 can become the major heating mechanisms. So how does it work? So you have H2 in ground states. It absorbs a UV photons. So it is excited in electronic states. Then it de-excites towards excited raw vibrational levels. And if the density is high, then it de-excites with collisions between the other particles of the gas, and that transforms, in fact, the internal energy of H2 into kinetic energy, into gas temperature. So in fact, if H2 is formed in a region where the density is high to have lots of collisions and lots of UV photons, H2 is a machine to convert UV energy, so radiative energy, into kinetic energy. So H2 can heat the gas in dense regions and strongly illuminated by UV. For example, here you have some numerical models. So you find again here the densities. If you look at the main heating mechanisms, so we see that for this typical model, the H2 heating is competitive with the photoelectric heating up to visual extension 0.1, so it is nearly the H2 transition. So that is just to show you now in a space parameter what we obtain. So if we run plenty of models with different densities and different UV radiation field, you have here the main cooling mechanisms. So the O1 dominates the cooling for low density with C+. At very high densities, the gas-grain collisions dominate the cooling. And for the heating mechanism, we see that the photoelectric effect dominates the heating up to low densities, but as soon as the densities are high, H2 becomes an important agent to heat the gas. Second point to consider is the formation of H2. So the H2 forms on grains. You have atoms of hydrogen that stick at the surface of grains, and then when they meet at the surface, they can form a H2 molecule that goes in the gas. The formation rate of H2 has been determined in diffuse gas, so observation and absorption by Copernicus and Fuse, and the formation rate is typically 3 × 10⁻17 centimeter cube per second. This formation rate has been determined in diffuse gas, and it has been shown that for PDRs, this formation rate is too low. So, in fact, the mechanism is quite complex. If you look at laboratory experiments, when they simulate grains in laboratory experiments and they try to mimic this mechanism to determine formation rate of H2, they showed, we don't see the numbers here, this is the grain temperature on the H2 formation efficiency. It is formed between 13 Kelvin and 22 Kelvin, roughly. So there is a narrow window of grain temperature in which H2 can be formed, according to laboratory experiments. If the temperature is too low, we cannot form H2, because when atoms of hydrogen stick on the grains is very cold, and they cannot move at the surface to meet and form H2. Now, at high temperature, an atom of hydrogen sticks on a grain, and then it goes back in the gas phase because the grain is warm. So in fact, according to laboratory experiments, the formation of H2 can happen only in a very narrow window of grain temperature. And at the edge of PDRs, the grain temperature is higher than 20 Kelvin. So when we use a simple formation rate, and you compare the column density of H2 between observations and models, the models underpredict the column density of H2. So in fact, there are several scenarios that have been proposed to solve that as physisorption and chemisorption mechanisms. So the physisorption mechanisms, maybe just to show you the potential. So this represents the potential for the link between an atom of hydrogen on the surface of a grain. So here you have the Langmuir and Sherwood mechanism in which atoms of hydrogen are weakly bounded to the grains. They can migrate at the surface and form H2, so that is typically this process here. And then it could exist very deep wheel of adsorption. When an atom of hydrogen reaches such a site at the surface of the grain, then it cannot move. And if another atom of hydrogen hits this atom of hydrogen, that would release the H2. So that is the chemisorption mechanism, or the LA radial mechanism. So if you want to simulate that, so it becomes far more complex than to use a mean formation rate. So we have to use some guess about the binding energy of atom of hydrogen at the surface of the grains, and their binding energy for the migration at the surface of the grains. But what is important to understand is that the Langmuir and Sherwood mechanism, so the classical mechanism, depends on the grain temperature, whereas the LA radial mechanism depends on the gas temperature, because with the LA radial mechanism, so this mechanism here, the atom of hydrogen has to reach a chemisorption site, and that will depend on its kinetic energy when it hits the grains. So it depends on the gas temperature. So the more the higher is the gas temperature, the more efficient is this mechanism. So in fact, it is even more complex, the formation of H2, because now we have to consider what is the grain temperature in the interstellar medium. So in most of the codes, and that is what we did in the Meudon PDR code before this work by Aymeric Bron, we considered a mean temperature for the grains. So the temperature varies with the depth of the cloud, but that is a mean temperature. And the reality, the fact is that the grains that are small particles are hit by UV photons, and in fact, they are stochastically heated and they have the temperature that fluctuates on very short time scale, as you can see here. So in most of the code, we use a mean temperature that is represented here by this brown bar, but in reality, on very short time scale, the grains has fluctuations of temperature. So to do things properly, we need to consider these stochastic processes. And it's quite difficult to do because most of the equations we are putting in the code are deterministic equations. Whereas if you want to simulate such stochastic processes, you need to have a probabilistic or statistical method to simulate that. So I'm not going to go into the details, but that is what our former PhD student Imric Bron did. And they developed all new formalisms where instead of using a mean temperature, he computes a probability distribution function of the grain temperature at different positions in the cloud, and it changed completely the results on the formation of H2. So for example, here in green, you have the window efficiency for the formation of H2. If you use a mean temperature, then your numerical model is going to be very dependent on this mean temperature, because if it does not overlap, the formation rate will immediately drop of H2. Whereas when you consider the stochastic processes, you have a PDF of temperature, and then there is always a part, or at least often, a part of the grains that are at a good temperature to form molecular hydrogen. So in fact now, if we put such formalisms in astrochemical models as the Meudon PDR code, you have here the H2 formation efficiency as a function of the UV intensity of the radiation field. And you see that without considering this mechanism, just a mean formation rate, you are not able to explain the observations that are somewhere here from ISO and Spitzer. But as soon as you consider the grain temperature fluctuations, you are able to explain the line intensities of H2 in molecular gas. So in fact, with a simple approach, it is difficult to form H2 in the interstellar medium. When you do the physics in detail, you realize that H2 can be formed in very exotic environment, in very harsh environment. Because there is always a population of grains that is statistically at the good temperatures to form the H2. So now that is the impact on the line intensities. So here, you have the line intensities of H2, so that is, I think, towards the NGC 7023 for different lines. So the observations are the squares here, so it is different instruments, so that is the error bars. For different binding energies of the hydrogen on the grains. So you can consider, for example, that the case 1000 Kelvin correspond if we do a model with the mean formation rate of H2 in the interstellar gas, the 310 to minus 17 that I showed you. And when we go towards lower energies, that corresponds, in fact, to the stochastic processes. So you see that it has an impact on predictions of H2 line intensities, but not a lot, but a little bit, let's say. Concerning now the transition between H and H2, you see that as soon as we simulate properly the physics, the H-H2 transition is moved towards the edge of the cloud, very close to the edge of the cloud. And what is the most interesting is about CO. You see that for CO line intensities, if you use a mean formation rate of H2, then models are unable to explain the excitation of CO, whereas as soon as you treat in detail the physics of the formation of H2, the models becomes able to explain the line intensities of CO. So if you use two simple models for the formation of H2, you would conclude that UV photons cannot explain the formation of CO, and then you need other sources of energy. But as soon as you treat in detail the formation of H2, that changes completely the picture. So what is the relation between CO and H2? Because it may not be obvious. And that is the second point that must be simulated in detail. It is what we call a state-to-state chemistry. In fact, some chemical reactions have an activation barrier. For example, if you want to form the CH+, from the C++ plus H2 reaction, then you have to cross a barrier of 4,000 Kelvin. So in a gas at a few hundred Kelvin, it is very difficult to cross such a barrier, and you cannot form CH+. For SH+, it is even more dramatic because the barrier is nearly 10,000 Kelvin. But in fact, in this reaction, you can use the internal energy of H2 to overcome the activation barrier. So the energy in the raw vibrational level of H2 can be used to provide the energy to form the CH+. And some chemists have done some computations. This is the chemical reaction rate for this reaction as a function of the gas temperature and for H2 in different quantum levels. And as you can see, as soon as you reach a level of G equals 7, so the 7th rotational levels of H2, the reaction becomes efficient. So you need also to take that into account if you want to simulate properly the chemistry in PDRs. So what is happening, in fact, is the following. So H2 is able to form very efficiently at the edge of PDRs. It is excited in raw vibrational states by the UV pumping mechanisms. And from there, its internal energy can be used to overcome chemical reactions. And in fact, in all this region here, before the CCO transition, it is possible to form the CO as soon as you have a bit of excited H2 through the formation of OH and CH+, that then gives CO+, and that then transforms in CO. But to find that, you need to couple the chemistry and the excitation of H2. So, to deal with very detailed chemical processes. Okay. So, to conclude on the story, so we saw that H2 can be formed very efficiently even at the edge of clouds because of the stochastic effects, fluctuations on the grain temperature. So the HH2 transition arrives at very low AV, in fact. It contributes to the heating, so it will be excited. And then we have, in fact, a hot chemistry that takes place before the CCO transition, in which a few molecules are able to form, and that will be very excited. That is, in fact, what has been found very recently with ALMA observations of the Orion bar. So that is work that has been done by Javier Goicoechea. So they observed the Orion bar with ALMA. So ALMA starts to have the resolution to give the full structure, in fact, of the PDRs. And as you can see, they observe, let's take this one, for example, that is SH+, that has also a very strong activation barrier. And you see that it emits only in a very slab region, in a thin slab region. So that would correspond to the high pressure zone that I was talking about, in which we would have a hot chemistry leading to the formation of SH+, CH+, then CO, and then excited CO. Okay, now we have understood the chemistry, we have understood what happens in the PDRs, but the question that remains is why is there this high pressure zone and how can it be maintained? So the code we are using to do all this interpretation is a stationary code. So we cannot explain the origin of the high pressure zone with such a code. To do that, we would need a PDR code that does also hydrodynamics. So there are very, very few codes who does that. And in fact, Émeric Bron developed one of the first of these codes. So it solves the radiative transfer, the chemistry, and the thermal chemical evolutions, and everything is coupled to the hydrodynamics. So using such a code, in fact, he found that the reason why there is a high pressure zone at the edge of molecular clouds and the pressure is related to the intensity of the UV radiation field would be photoevaporation, in fact. So he simulated this region here, the edge of a cloud, with the H2 region on the molecular part. And here are a few results. So on this graph here, you have the time evolution of different quantities, the velocity, the pressure. So there is a shock that propagates from the stars and that goes inside the cloud. And what is interesting to see, if we take a snapshot here and we look at the pressure, we find a nearly constant pressure in the atomic layer and the warm molecular layer. So the hydrodynamics says that we would reach a high pressure, in fact, at the edge of the PDR, and that would be due to the photoevaporation mechanisms and the compression due to the radiation field. And now, if you look at the relation between the pressure in this region and the intensity of the radiation field for different kind of stars, he also found with his model that there is a relationship between the thermal pressure at the edge of PDRs and the intensity of the radiation field. And if you compare now, the two dashed lines here are in fact the one obtained with the numerical models, we see that it brackets the observations, in fact. So photoevaporation is in fact a good candidate to explain the origin of the high pressure that we observed either with the Herschel observations or with the ALMA observations. Okay, so to conclude, so first of all, the observations of atomic and molecular lines of simple species, in fact, helps a lot to constrain the physics and the properties of interstellar clouds, but to inverse the problem, we really need models with detailed physics. If you use too simple models, then we go away of the good solutions. So as I showed you, for example, for the CO excitation, that the prediction of models depends a lot on the way that the H2 formation of grains is simulated. And we found from all these observations, when you put everything together, a new scenario to explain what is the physics and what happens in the interaction between a star and the interstellar cloud. We do not need, well, the important point is not if the medium is clumpy or not. The most important point is this high pressure zone here, where we would have a compression of the edge of the cloud, so in which H2 could be formed efficiently because of the high temperature in the gas and the formation of molecules through a hot chemistry in which activation energy barrier can be overcome thanks to the energy inside the internal levels of H2. Okay, so the next step on that is consistent, in fact, also with the ALMA observations. I've not talked a lot about the ALMA observation, but that is exactly the same conclusion that they reach. And the next step is to have GWST observations of such regions, because with a resolution of 1 arcsecond, we would be able to resolve a bit distance of 10 to minus 3 parsecs at the edge of closed PDRs. So for example, in the case of the Orion bar, this represents here the intensity of different lines of H2, the function of the depth in the Orion bar, and the GWST should be able to have the resolution to observe all this transition inside the PDR. So we'll be able to test in very detail the physics and the thermal profiles of the PDR. Okay, and there is a ERS program that has been accepted to study that in the Orion bar. Yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Questions? Joe.
In the zone of where you make this high pressure region, I mean, that would of course affect the stability. The gene's mass would go down. Does that have any implications for instability or star formation?
I think the gene mass has to be considered on the bigger scale. Here, what it will affect, in fact, it will affect the quantity of molecular hydrogen in the whole cloud. If you move the HH2 transition towards the edge of the cloud, then you have a bigger part of the cloud that is molecular, and that is a bigger mass that is able to form stars. Because the high pressure zone is a very narrow edge. It's just 10 to minus 3 per sec. So it will not affect the gene mass.
You know, if you can group your questions together by side, that would be very useful.
Thank you. So I have two questions. The first one is about the dominant size of your grain in the fluctuation model.
What is what?
The dominant size of the grain. There are very small grains.
Yes, yes. The fluctuations here. For the UV photons, it is only the small grains. So, for example, it is, you see the fluctuations are
What do you
0.05 micron.
what do you call small grains?
Here, okay. Okay, so here you are 0.01 micron,
Okay.
and you see that after you have less fluctuations. That is fluctuations due to UV photons, okay? Now, if you go in the dark part of the cloud, where the grains have a ice mantle, so they can be considered as big, then you would have to consider the effect of cosmic rays, and that is something that we will study in the future, but cosmic rays may have enough energy to
The
induce...
direct effect of cosmic rains or the UV generate or both? Or
Sorry?
you have the direct effect of cosmic rains,
yes.
of cosmic
Yes,
radiation.
both. In
Both,
fact, both.
and
both.
UV, which is generated.
The secondary UV photons and the cosmic rays by themselves could impact even bigger grains inside the cloud. And for example, and that is a very important question, because when we study complex molecules in dark clouds, in fact, for methanol, formaldehyde, and so on and so forth, we found that using classical approaches for chemistry, so if we do not consider these fluctuations, the results are very dependent on the temperature of the grains, on the property of the grains. As soon as you change something, a barrier determined in laboratory, width for tunneling effect, for example, it can change the abundance predicted by the models by a factor of 10, 100, several orders of magnitude. And that does not seem reasonable, because when you do the observations, you always find the same trends between the different objects. So in fact, one possibility would be that the temperature fluctuations, in fact, would smooth the results of the models to the uncertainties. I have not presented that here, but Aymeric Braun did it for the orthopara conversion of H2 on grains, and that is one of the results, is that there are some uncertainties in the process by itself, depending on the nature of the grains, depending on the conversion times at the surface of the grains. If you do not consider the temperature fluctuations, then the models are very dependent on all those uncertainties. As soon as you have the temperature fluctuations, since you have a statistical approach, it becomes less dependent. And I think that is something that is important to consider for bigger grains heated by cosmic rays and secondary UV photons for the surface chemistry.
Okay, so thanks. So the second question, have you tried to apply the model to local ULIOGs, ultra-luminous infrared galaxies?
No.
No.
No. We applied the model to dwarf galaxies, to Magellanic Clouds also. But there is a difficulty when you want to compare such PDR models to extragalactic observations. In fact, in extragalactic observations, we have the CO laders, but the beam, we do not have the spatial resolution. So inside the beam, you can have many things. You can have PDRs, you can have shocks, you can have X-ray regions, and it's very difficult to find a clear scenario, because you can have different scenarios that explain the same thing.
So you said your model is sort of an alternative to the clumpy model, and a different explanation with the same sort of observations. Do you think there's a way to observationally distinguish between the two models and rule one of the two out?
Well, in fact, with the resolution of ALMA, we should see the clumps. And what we see in the ALMA observation is that we have a slab of gas with the hot chemistry. So in fact, the ALMA observation starts to show that the clumps are not the main key points. That does not mean that there is not structures inside the cloud. You can have denser regions and less dense regions, but that is not the key point, in fact, if you want to understand the interaction between the star and the cloud.
In the hot chemistry reactions, you envisage that the hydrogen will be vibrationally excited and retain its energy, metastable situation. This would be reduced for HD. Would this give you a clue? Are there observations
No,
that would
because
give you a clue to this?
there are very few observations of HD, especially in such regions. We have the few lines of HD, but only the lowest lines of HD, the 1,0 line, typically. For H2, with the GWST, we'll be able to observe tens of lines, so we'll be able to probe its excitation in the quantum levels. And that would be a good improvement to constrain such models, and that was understanding.
I'll take the privilege of the last question.
Yeah.
So in the Orion bar in particular, I'm interested in. So in the low AV region, what role do free electrons play?
For what? For the
Excitation of certain molecules, like hydrogen fluoride, for example. That was proposed by van der Tak.
The electrons, so they contribute to the heating, that's sure, and to the excitation of a species, yes. But, yeah.
So let's thank Frank again.
Thank you.